The hearing was never supposed to become this. When the NPB called manager Ibata and Shohei Ohtani to Tokyo, the expectation was procedure. A formal review. The kind of institutional process that produces a summary document, a few carefully worded public statements, and then quietly closes the door on an uncomfortable chapter. But something different happened inside that room. Something that no press release could contain, and no carefully managed media appearance could explain away. The kind of moment that only occurs when people who have been carrying the weight of something enormous finally put it down in front of witnesses. What came out of that Tokyo hearing did not just reveal what went wrong at the WBC. It revealed the fault lines running beneath Japanese baseball that everyone had been pretending were not there. First, it is important to understand the nature of this gathering before interpreting what came out of it. This was not a media event. There were no cameras permitted, no prepared remarks distributed in advance, no public gallery. It was a closed proceeding convened by the Nippon Professional Baseball Organization with federation officials, team administrators, and the two men most closely associated with the campaign seated across the table from the people who determine the future of Samurai Japan. Those who were present have described the atmosphere carefully. Not hostile. Not emotional. Methodical. The kind of room where silence is used as a tool, where every answer is weighed not just for its content but for the confidence with which it is delivered. Manager Ibata arrived having prepared extensively. Weeks of reviewing footage, reconstructing timelines, examining every decision point in the tournament campaign from the training camp in Miyazaki through to the final loss. His intention was clear to everyone in the room from the moment he sat down. He had not come to be managed. He had come to account for what had happened with as much precision as he could bring to it. He moved through the review systematically. Preparation structure. Pitching selections. Lineup decisions under pressure. The coherence of the group in the final days before competition. And then came the question no one had asked him publicly before. One of the senior officials leaned forward and asked whether, in the final preparation period before the tournament began, Ibata himself believed the team was ready. The room waited. He said no. There is a kind of accountability that is performed, and a kind that is real. Anyone who has spent time in professional sport learns quickly to recognize the difference. The performed version contains all the correct words arranged in the correct order. It sounds like honesty because it is structured like honesty. But it leaves nothing behind when it is over. It does not change anything. What Ibata delivered in that Tokyo hearing room was the second kind. He described something that the public narrative around the WBC campaign had never fully engaged with, the structural difficulty of building genuine team cohesion across a roster assembled from completely different environments. Players arriving from different NPB clubs, others returning from American leagues, some carrying personal career pressures that had nothing to do with the national team. A preparation window that is always too short for what it is being asked to achieve. An expectation from the entire country that is enormous before the first training session begins. He did not use these realities as excuses. He used them as context for explaining where his own decisions had been insufficient. Where he had assumed readiness that had not yet formed. Where he had prioritized tactical preparation over the harder work of building the kind of internal trust that holds a group together when the games begin to matter most. He named no players. He deflected no responsibility. The resignation was submitted the following morning. What followed in the public response surprised many observers. In a country where failure at a national tournament carries significant weight, where the manager is understood to bear responsibility for outcome, the specific texture of Ibata's accountability generated something unexpected. Not anger. Something closer to recognition. A number of former players spoke about what it takes to sit in a room like that and deliver that kind of testimony without protection. One described it simply: most people in that situation find a way to share the weight, even subtly. Ibata carried it alone. That choice says something about him that his tournament record never could. Before we can understand what Otani's declaration means for the national team's future, we need to understand precisely what Ohtani has represented to it, not in the statistics, but in the daily texture of what he brought to every shared environment. The younger players who have trained alongside Ohtani in national team settings speak about the same things when they are asked to describe the experience. Not the at-bats. Not the pitching appearances. The hours in between. In the national team cafeteria, Ohtani follows a routine that does not bend to the environment around it. Before game days, he eats with the same methodical focus he brings to preparation, a large bowl of rice, boiled eggs, vegetables, salad, consuming exactly what his body requires at that phase of his conditioning cycle without variation, without complaint, and without appearing to notice that everyone around him is watching. One player from the 2023 WBC squad recalled attempting to replicate the same meal. He managed it for 2 days before modifying it. He said with a wry smile that he realized very quickly the imitation was not the point. The point was that Ohtani had arrived at that meal through a decade of deliberate self-study, and the only way to build something comparable was to do the same kind of work for yourself. That is the thing about Ohtani that photographs and highlight reels cannot communicate. The results are visible to everyone. The architecture behind the results is almost invisible, because he does not perform it. He simply lives it. His relationship with nutrition began in high school. He set personal intake quotas for himself, brought specific meals to school, ate before practice rather than waiting until after, and treated food not as reward or pleasure but as the most direct form of physical investment available to him. A former Nippon Ham teammate once revealed that Ohtani's pasta contained nothing but salt, and when challenged on whether such a meal was worth eating, Ohtani replied calmly and sincerely that it was delicious. For him, the question of enjoyment was simply not the relevant measure. Entering professional baseball, the system became more sophisticated. He developed a clear separation between phases of conditioning, periods oriented toward building mass and strength, periods oriented toward reducing body fat and refining composition, and calibrated his intake of carbohydrates and protein precisely against each phase. In a conversation earlier in 2025, he described pasta and flour-based carbohydrates as excellent year-round sources that he adjusts in balance and volume depending on the time of year, not because of preference, but because the data of his own body has shown him this works. The precision is not obsessive. It is logical. It is the application of the same kind of preparation mentality to the body that he applies to studying opposing hitters, to understanding pitch sequencing, to every other dimension of his craft. For the young players watching this across a cafeteria table, the temptation is always to focus on what he eats. The deeper lesson, the one he has tried to model rather than explain, is why he eats it. He does not follow a program. He has built a relationship with his own physical requirements through years of attention, curiosity, and willingness to make the unglamorous choice every single day without external reward. That is not something you can imitate. It is something you can only build for yourself. When Ohtani took his seat in that hearing room, the quality of attention in the space shifted in the way it always does when he enters a shared environment. Not because he engineered it. Simply because of what he is and what he represents to everyone present. He spoke with the same deliberate care he brings to every public engagement. He talked about what the WBC genuinely means to him, and those present were clear that what he expressed was not the managed sentiment of a man performing gratitude. It was specific. He spoke about the quality of being in a shared locker room again with players who grew up in the same baseball culture, who understand the same references, who carry the same foundational relationship to the game. He said it gives him something the regular season cannot. Then he said he would not be returning. He was precise about why. This was not frustration with the loss. It was not a reaction to the proceedings. It was a conclusion he had been moving toward for some time, and the full weight of this campaign had clarified it into something he could no longer defer. The physical requirements of competing at the highest level in Major League Baseball across a full season are total. They leave nothing available for a second peak performance window inside the same calendar. Adding the preparation investment, the travel, the emotional weight, and the performance pressure of a WBC into that structure, particularly at a stage where his obligation to the Dodgers demands everything, creates a situation where something inevitably receives less than it deserves. He said it without decoration: he cannot give Samurai Japan what it deserves while also giving the Dodgers what they need. And he will not give either one less than everything. In an era when elite athletes routinely manage public perception through carefully calibrated availability, that statement carried a different kind of weight. It was not strategic. It was simply an honest accounting of what full commitment requires, and where his full commitment currently belongs. The most consequential outcome of the Tokyo proceedings was not the resignation, and it was not the withdrawal. It was the ruling against Murakami. The NPB Chairman's office had been conducting a parallel conduct review throughout the tournament cycle. Those familiar with the process described the findings as thorough and the conclusions as unambiguous. The disciplinary action announced in the aftermath was the most severe the Federation has issued in recent memory. The complete record of what was reviewed remains partially sealed. But the language of the ruling was not ambiguous about its scope. The conduct cited fell below the standard expected of a national representative. It had damaged the cohesion of the squad at a critical period. And the ruling itself, in its framing and its permanence, closes any realistic path back to the national team. For a player of Murakami's talent, a player who entered this campaign as one of the most anticipated names on the roster, it is a result that should not have been possible to arrive at. And yet here we are. The Murakami ruling, read alongside Ibata's testimony and Otani's declaration, tells a coherent story. It is not a story about tactical failures or roster decisions. It is a story about the gap between the standard the Samurai Japan uniform requires and the standard some members of this campaign were actually living. Ibata named that gap in the hearing room when he admitted the team had not been ready. He named it not in terms of physical preparation or technical ability, but in terms of cohesion. The quality of internal trust that makes a group resilient under pressure. The shared commitment to something larger than individual performance. That quality is not built through team meetings or motivational frameworks. It is built through daily choices that no one is watching. The meal before the game. The preparation before anyone else arrives. The way a senior player treats a younger one who is struggling. The willingness to hold a standard privately, without recognition, over a long period of time. Otani has modeled this for years. His routine is not a public performance. It is simply what he does. And the gap between watching someone live at that level and being able to sustain that level yourself is where Japanese baseball's next challenge lives. The question Ibata left behind is not whether the right tactical choices were made. That conversation has already been had. The question he left behind is what the players who shared that locker room during this campaign will take from the experience. Will they remember the loss and feel its bitterness? Of course. That is inevitable. Defeat at a tournament like the WBC does not release its grip quickly. But will they look past the result and ask the harder question, which is how they spent the hours when the result was still being decided? What they ate, and why. How they prepared, and whether they prepared like men who understood the standard the uniform required. Whether they chose to do the unglamorous things fully, or whether they found small ways to do them partially. Otani will not be at the next WBC to provide that daily demonstration. Ibata will not be on the bench to hold the expectation. The men who shaped this generation's experience of what Samurai Japan should look like are stepping away at the same moment. What remains is the standard they lived. The question is whether the next generation understood what they were watching. Not the home runs. Not the strikeouts. Not the moments the cameras were pointed at. The breakfast. The preparation before dawn. The quiet insistence on doing everything fully, every day, because the uniform demands it even when no one is checking. That is what Samurai Japan has lost, and what it must now find a way to build again from within.